G'day, I'm Owen, and you've joined this week's edition of the Pub Test, where we are continuing our Jack the Ripper suspect series, and in this one, we are looking at James Maybrick. Because there is so much to unpack in this one, we are not going to mess around. Who was he, and how does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, James was born in 1838. Sadly, his older brother, who was also named James, passed away at 4 months old. So when this new baby came along, the parents named him James as well. Now, he had some siblings. All the ones that survived into adulthood had quite successful careers, or at least were comfortable enough, we would say. And James and his brother were involved in cotton trading and quite successful at it. Had offices in various locations. Now, some of James's early life, up until 1880, is just a little bit cloudy, we would say. Because there has been a suggestion that he was married before 1880, which we'll get back to later. But it was actually a significant event in his life in 1880 when he was traveling between continents. He met Florence Chandler, who later famously became known as Florrie Maybrick. She was 18 years old, and in 1880, well, James is 42. But despite the age difference, James and Florrie hit it off. They get married. 8 months after the wedding, they have a child. It's said it was a premature baby, and to be honest, I cannot ascertain that definitely, but I would just suggest that a few premature babies happened back in those days when you would not have a child outside of wedlock. But things don't go super great for the couple. The marriage does get a bit strained. Now, Florrie was from Mobile, Alabama in the United States. And for a time, James had his office over in the United States. But then, due to some economic downturns, they decide to go back to London. Now, they did start seeking company outside of the marriage, both of them. And as stated earlier, James may have already been married because a census record showed someone that claimed to be the wife of James Maybrick, and even when they passed away in 1927, that's how this person is listed as. But it could have been a different James Maybrick. Don't really know, but regardless, things weren't good on the home front. Things got very volatile, and some physical altercations happened where Florrie was hit. But then she purchases some fly paper. So paper you would hang up to kill some flies, because you couldn't get some spray back then. And they were full of arsenic. Well, during the months of 1889, and remember they're living around Liverpool, but James becomes really, really sick and goes downhill fast, and, well, he dies. When they do the autopsy, they find he was rather full of this arsenic. And because of the fly papers, they go and arrest Florrie. Now, as I say, there's a lot to look at here, so we've already discussed James Stephen in this series as a possible Jack the Ripper suspect. But as mentioned in that video, his father was a judge. And he was the judge when Florrie Maybrick was put on trial for the murder of her husband. And he did not have some very nice things to say about Florrie at all. In fact, we would say he was making some rather prejudicial comments about her. So we can see why the jury quickly said, she's guilty, and he sentences her to death. But perhaps because she was actually a citizen of the United States, that sentence did get commuted to life in prison. But if you remember back to the James Stephen video, he passed away of an illness, and then not long after that, this Judge Stephen, who was the judge on the Maybrick case, passed away inside a mental asylum. So perhaps his mental function was deteriorating at this time, because we're only talking a few years after this case that he himself passes away due to a bad mental illness. Yet, presidents of the United States had got involved in this case. They were saying something needs to be looked at here. This doesn't seem quite right. And it's not because a younger woman was in prison for murdering this older bloke. Because we could understand, perhaps it looked like she was a gold digger. Like 18 years old when she got married, had a couple of kids real quick, wanted the money because he looked like he was very affluent, though the reality at the time was a bit different. But on the outside, you'd think he was loaded. Bump him off so she can go off with this new younger bloke she found. Except there was some strong evidence that was not presented at the trial. And this is quite staggering. See, James had formed an addiction to arsenic. And we might wonder why on earth you would take arsenic and become addicted to it. Well, it might surprise us that some things that we take that are bad for us, we can get addicted to. Because can you think of anything like that would happen today? But you know, it's really, really funny with arsenic. We hear arsenic poisoning and think that is woeful. But arsenic has been used in medicine for a long time in the past. And it's still used in medicine today, which might really, really shock us. But it does have medicinal purposes. But used in excess, it has harmful consequences. Lethal consequences. But we can get addicted to arsenic like we can get addicted to opioids and whatever else might be around. And James had a bit of an odd condition. He had a bit of hypochondria. And so during this time, he was starting to take medicines. Perhaps he didn't need, but definitely got addicted to, arsenic being one of them. And a couple of days before his death, he got a box of medicines including arsenic. And it is suggested he took a bit too much of that, and that's what knocked him over. Not the minute amount of arsenic you would have got off these fly papers, and certainly even if he had sat and eaten all 12 of these fly papers, he wouldn't have died that quickly. So none of that was mentioned at the trial, that he was addicted to the product they found in his system. So when all this information comes to light, Florrie Maybrick actually, after 15 years in prison, gets released. She returns to the United States, tries to live a very simple and quiet life, did write a book, but then she passes away around about the 1920s. So, with all of that, other than living near the area where the crimes happened, and actually living in the area in 1888, how does James Maybrick come up into the Jack the Ripper calculations? Well, in 1992, a diary was discovered, and it does not name James Maybrick as the writer of the diary, but the names within it, the occupation that he had, and the people he spoke about identified the writer of the diary as James Maybrick. And what is more, there are some absolutely chilling details about the Whitechapel murders in that diary, including a very, very detailed description of what happened when Mary Kelly was murdered inside that room, when the perpetrator had the time to do whatever they wanted to do. And the diary signs off, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." And added to that, a gold watch was found in 1993, and on it, it had scratched the 5 Jack the Ripper victims' names on the back of it, as well as J. Maybrick. So we're putting all this together and we actually have found the diary and the watch of Jack the Ripper. Except, was the diary and the watch real? Now, there is massive debate about this. And there is still 2 very strong sides to the argument. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in too much of the controversy because there is a lot of controversy about the diary and about the watch and if they're real. Just a couple of major things to note. The people who, I would say, co-authored the book about this and possibly authored the diary themselves, their marriage did not last very long after this. So the main person who's accredited with this, Michael Barrett, has come out and said that the diary was a hoax that him and his wife came up with. See, Michael came up with this great idea. And it helped because Florence Maybrick already had a name. Her trial went down in infamy and showed that, look, someone innocent, completely innocent, could go to prison with no right of reply. And so it stated that it was her case that primarily led to the appeal system in the English courts. So if a travesty like that happened, you could get out. So we have a famous name, and her husband was in Whitechapel, or in that area, in 1888. And possibly in Austin, Texas, in the 1880s as well, when some similar crimes had happened. So all he then had to do was write the story. And then find paper that would age in that way, or aged paper, and then have someone, which he stated was his wife, write with the correct ink, correct style of handwriting, this diary. And then you've got the Diary of Jack the Ripper and a bestseller. Now, this is not a made-up conjecture. In fact, he confessed to this himself. Yet, he has also retracted those statements on numerous occasions as well. His wife, Anne, and they're no longer together, but she said, no, I've had this diary for a long time. And in fact, interestingly, she has said that she's now found that she was related to Florrie Maybrick and has attended a Maybrick family reunion. Which is of interest, because that would sort of say, well, because she was in the family line, she may have had a genuine diary from back then. And that's fairly critical to note. And I'll say why. Because there is debate about the authenticity of when this diary was written. But there's not much debate about the contents of it not being real, because the details listed in the diary match the sensationalized reports about some of these crimes, particularly the Mary Kelly one, where certain body parts and that were positioned and what was done to them. That didn't add up to reality because the police reports were different, but the sensational reports in the media matched what was in the diary, which would lend itself to say that someone was writing it off the wrong information, not the actual police reports. So I would say whoever wrote the diary was not Jack the Ripper. And if that was the case, then I would suggest the gold watch that was found may also be non-genuine as well. See, if the diaries are real, then James Maybrick is Jack the Ripper. Yet he doesn't seem to fit the profile or the type of person that we would expect. But that doesn't eliminate him automatically, does it? Because often these people are the ones we would least expect. But what do you think? Are the diaries new forgeries or old forgeries? Or do you think they're real? In my opinion, I don't think James Maybrick is Jack the Ripper. But I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on this particular topic. So thank you very much for watching. It is genuinely appreciated. Like, subscribe. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.